Welcome everyone. My name is Dan Gerstein. I'm the president of Gotham Ghostwriters. We're excited to be hosting our second free workshop on ghostwriting with our partners at the American Society of Journalists and Authors, ASJA. Just a quick introduction to the subject matter tonight. We're saying call this the do's and don'ts of writing pricing, and the genesis of this workshop was out of the first workshop we did with the ASJA, which was really about how to break into ghostwriting. And not surprisingly, most of the questions we got from the audience, even from some of the professionals who were with us, was around the questions of getting paid, what to charge, how to charge. So we thought it might be helpful to broaden the discussion and provide a service to more experienced ghostwriters, writers for hire, speechwriters, people in our community, to bring together panel experts to kind of talk about what some of the rules of the road, some rules of thumb to follow for pricing your services, how to get the most of your ghosting, as I like to say, as well as some traps to avoid. And we're really appreciative. We got some great experts with us tonight, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before I do, I wanted to kind of do a quick poll of our audience members here to get a sense of how many of the folks here are predominantly people who write books, ghostwriters. And how many of you are speechwriters? Got a few of those. And how about freelance journalists? Some overlap I see as well. We are going to talk a little bit up here, have a little bit of a Q&A, and then we're going to do our best to kind of have the bulk of the time set aside for questions from both the audience members here and through Alexandra Owens from ASJA, who's going to be our lovely moderator tonight of the online community to get some questions from people watching on the internet. So let me start by introducing our panelists. We're honored to have Lori Lewis, who just happened to be authored a book called What to Charge, Pricing Strategies for Freelancers and Consultants, which, by the way, will be on sale after the event.
Lori will be leading how to market your book.
What kind of writing people would be if we wouldn't allow you to pump your book. To Lori's right, we have Ellen Newborn, who is the dual champion Gotham ghostwriter and ASJA member, wears both hats, former USA Today reporter and top flight ghostwriter, business books. And Ellen also had the distinguished honor to be a holdover panelist from our first workshop with the ASJA. And then we have Linda Connor, who is also an ASJA member and the principal of the Linda Connor Literary Agency. She's also a nationally recognized author, editor, frequent lecturer, publishing conferences. Anything else you do, Linda?
Clean my house.
That's quite a renaissance resume. So to kick off our discussion, I thought I would ask Lori to talk a little bit about sort of the genesis of your book, how it came about, and sort of the key takeaways you got from doing your research and that led you to write the book.
Okay. Well, as Dan said, the question, whenever you get a group of writers, freelancers in a room together is, what do I charge for this job? It's everybody's question. Other question is, how do I find the work? But I am no marketing expert. I wouldn't say I'm a pricing expert, even though I wrote the book on it, because every day we learn something new about pricing. But this book came about because everybody that I knew who was a freelancer, independent writer, ghost, whatever you want to call them, always had the same question every time starting a job. And so I put together some principles. This is actually the second edition. The first edition came out in 2000. And I was very pleased to see when the recession came around that even though rates may have been dropping, work certainly was drying up, the strategies in the first edition held true. And so I think that these strategies in this book are really timeless. They are things that you can do no matter what kind of freelance work you do and no matter what year it is. Whether it's pre-recession, post-recession, during the recession, it's really a question of how you direct your business and having a business sense about it, that makes you a successful freelancer financially.
What would you say are the 3 or 4 main rules, if you want to refer to your, for those people watching online, Lori was very nice to prepare a handout for our audience members about answering the specific questions, the do's and don'ts of writing pricing.
Right, I put together on this list 5 do's and don'ts, but you just said, what do you think of basic rules? And I actually have come up with 2 rules of pricing, freelance pricing, that is. Does anybody know the 2 rules of pricing? Okay, you actually have them summarized together in point 2 on this list here. And that is, when you talk money with your client, basically what you don't want to do is talk money first. You want to get as much information as you possibly can, and I see a gentleman in our audience nodding, because you know if you talk money too soon, you have a chance of making a commitment to a fee that is not going to work out well for the job that's involved. You want to get as much information as you possibly can about the job. And once you have all that information, you might think, okay, I'm ready to get back to the client now and say my price. But there's something else you have to do. And that is, you need to come up with a negotiating strategy in case the client says, no, I don't want to pay that much, or I can't pay that much. What are you going to suggest to make it a doable job for you? One that you're going to be happy with the money and that the client can accept as well. So the 2 rules of pricing both amount to don't talk money too fast with the client. What you want to do is first figure out the best job, and then the best price for the job, and then you want to come up with a negotiating strategy so that you walk away happy and your client does. And part of that negotiating strategy is knowing when you're going to walk away, period. If the client is not going to pay you what you know that job is worth and what your services are worth, you need to be prepared to walk away. And it helps if you plan all this in advance so that you don't end up, as so many people do, the client says, oh, I can't pay that much, I can give you half of that. You say, oh, okay, I'll do it for that. And then you're going to kick yourself. Or you're going to simply say, well, too bad, I can't work for half of it. Maybe you can find a way to get the client to bring up that half to a more manageable fee for the client and one that is acceptable for you. So those are really the rules, the 2 rules of pricing. I did put some other do's and don'ts down here. One is a mistake that I think a lot of people make, and that's to assume there is only one correct price for a job. There isn't. There are many ways of looking at a price for a job, and it's going to depend upon who the client is and who you are, what the client wants from you, how you work. There are all sorts of parameters in it, so don't assume that there is one right job. And a price that I may feel is the right job may not be a price that Linda's comfortable with. So you need to always be sure that you are thinking about yourself and your client's characteristics when you are pricing a job.
Well, and I would just add to that point, I'm going to move on to ask Ellen to weigh in here a second, is you know, it's when you play poker, particularly if we're playing Texas Hold'em, you're not playing your cards as much as you're playing your opponent. And I think to a certain degree that applies to when you're negotiating pricing, is you have to, there's sort of 2 variables. One is, you know, what to charge for the project, what your time is worth, but also the budget and the inclinations of the client you're negotiating with, and you have to be able to read them in thinking about your pricing strategy. Whether their top priority is getting the best caliber person, or they'll be impressed by a high price, or whether they're super budget conscious and that you'll scare them off if you come in with a high fee, or whether they're somewhere in between on that scale. Ellen, I wanted to, we touched on this a little bit in the last workshop, but I'd love to have you kind of start off by talking a little bit about sort of, some of the primary lessons you learned early on from, maybe some of the mistakes you made in how to price your services and how that led you to adjust your approach.
Right. One of the things that I think writers need to think about is not just looking at price. I like to think of a job in terms of profitability. And I think that that's something that writers don't take into account. What the price tag is just one aspect of how happy you're going to be with this fee. And so I've done books for a very low price tag that were very profitable, and I've done books for high price tags that were such a nightmare that they became unprofitable. So really I think that understanding whether or not you're charging the right price and setting the right price is really a function of understanding all the factors that come together to make it profitable for you. And so I always want to know, for example, where is the material coming from for the book? How am I going to get this material? Who's in charge of getting this material? What time frame are we looking at? All of these are factors that before you even get to a negotiation, you want to know what the parameters of the job are going to be, because that's going to help you decide whether or not this is a profitable gig or an unprofitable gig. I've done profitable $10,000 books. I've done unprofitable $40,000 books. It just depends on, it depends on all the other factors that come together. So really when people ask me, what do you charge? I always say that's really not the only thing you need to know whether or not I'm doing well. I could be charging a lot and still be losing money, or I could be charging a little and making a great living.
Let me press you on that one point, because I think in my experience it happens a lot, and I imagine for some number of writers here, they run into this, is it's the first question a client wants to know. Right off the bat, what do you charge? Right? They want to get to the bottom line right away. How do you delicately get them to hold off? Like, what strategies do you use to get them to hold off so that you can gather the information you need without alienating them?
I always say every book is different. Every book is different, every client is different. So, and I customize my service to meet your needs. So I always say to the client when they want to say, how much do you charge? I said, well, I'll tell you what I need to know from you, and then I can tell you how much I charge for it. And so, that really is sort of a way of saying you need to tell me what you want first. Because sometimes it'll be, something that's very straightforward, and sometimes it'll be something that's very, very complicated. And that all impacts your fee. I mean, actually, really what it comes down to is how long is it going to take me to do the project? How hard is it going to be to do that project? And that's what, makes it feel like a good fee to you or a bad fee to you. So I always tell a client, it's not that I don't have a price list, it's that, your project is different than any other project. I've never done the same project twice. Everybody's book is different. So let's talk about yours and what you need.
Linda, you have a really unique perspective here as an agent, so I'd love to get your thoughts and sort of, I hate to start off on the negative, but I think it's a good way to get into this in terms of we start with the don'ts before we get to the do's. Some of the mistakes you've seen writers you've worked with make in figuring out how to charge for their services, and then the insights you've gained from your experienced negotiator that might be able to help some of the writers who are listening.
Right. Well, I've found that many writers, the writer half of any book writing team, I distinguish the writers who do the real work from the experts who may do some work and may do very little work other than put their name on the book and promote the book and supply some of the information. But the writers often have a negotiating strategy I call saying, thank you very much. They're offered a project, they say thank you very much. They don't even think in terms of what their options are and what the flexibility they have is. My colleagues here made a few very good points, and that is every project is different, every collaborator is different. I tend to come from the writer's perspective more than the so-called lead authors, maybe because my background is as a collaborator. I'm one of the few literary agents I know who actually started out as a magazine writer and as an author and a co-author. So these are two books that I co-authored. I'm also a proud member of ASJA, as Dan said. And I joined the organization many years ago when I was still writing magazine articles and books. So this is one book I co-authored called Trouble-Free Menopause. By the way, it's a total lie. And I wrote this with an R.
That part of the discussion was off the record, by the way.
I wrote this with an RD named Judy Marshall, a woman I met when I was working at Weight Watchers magazine. And we got a modest advance for this book, and we split the advance 50-50 because we agreed that that was the thing to do. In this case, when I got a little smarter about collaboration, this was in fact the last book I wrote before becoming a literary agent. This is called Just the Way You Are, How to Be Fit and Healthy Whatever Your Size. And I wrote this with a fairly well-to-do MD, and one who was, in all honesty, much more interested in getting a book published than how much money he was going to get for it. He made that perfectly clear to me from the beginning. And so I took full advantage of that as his co-author, and I said, great, Steve, then why not give me the full advance? And luckily, he was fine with that arrangement. So 2 books, 2 expert co-authors, and very different experiences. It just shows that you can negotiate in many different ways and not necessarily accept whatever is offered to you right off the bat. Another thing in terms of rules, I would say never make a decision the same day as you hear about a project. Always do the 24-hour I'm going to sleep on it rule that I have followed all my life as a writer. And even if I know I want to do it, even if I think they're overpaying me, which seldom happens, but even in those rare cases, I would say, sounds good, let me think about it, I'll get back to you tomorrow. You have nothing to lose. I think writers are guilty of becoming very, very anxious and very worried about losing something that chances are they're not going to lose. I tell this to my clients now all the time. Do not get so stressed out about, oh my God, if I don't make this decision today, maybe they'll call somebody else. Chances are that is not going to happen. So it's really in your best interest to say, sounds good, give me a day to think about it, I promise I'll get back to you tomorrow. And you may totally change your mind. You may think about something in the 24 hours that passed that did not occur to you when you were first having that discussion. It just gives you more ammunition to make that negotiation.
That's a great point. Linda, I want to ask you one quick follow-up question. So to my point about, really kind of factoring in who you're negotiating with, so it's probably different for a lot of people negotiating with, say, the name author or the expert that you're going to collaborate with directly versus negotiating with their agent. So based on your experience as an agent, you've seen it both ways. Do you have any tips for writers when they're negotiating with agents who are representing the name author that they're going to be collaborating with?
Don't do it. Don't do it. And I know this will sound very self-serving, but if you are an independent writer and you're up against an expert, whether it's a well-known expert or not, and his or her agent, you're in a losing position unless you are a really tough negotiator. And in my experience, most writers are not as tough as they need to be. So unless you are the exception to the rule, I would say get an agent. Get an agent to represent you. And when people come to me and they say, I was offered this project and it's client X and client X's agent is representing this, I say, you don't have to work with me, and sometimes I don't want to work with the writer for whatever reason, but I do recommend that they get an agent, because if you're in that position, who do you think is going to win? The person with the agent, the person with the connections to the publishing house, the person who has done many, many more publishing contracts than you have. And generally speaking, and I know there are some editors in this room who I think will back me up, when there's an agent and an expert up against the writer tends to get the dregs. And because I am very pro-writer, I have clients who, I have about 75 clients, and I say about half of my clients are writer clients and the other half are expert clients. And I am a big, big supporter of my writer clients. I'm a supporter of all my clients, of course, but I really do try to look out for my writer clients because they tend not to be as good at looking out for themselves in a negotiation situation. And I always say to a writer, you are not going to come from a position of strength if you're just waiting for an offer to be made to you by somebody's agent. So there's nothing to stop you from bringing in an agent, and oftentimes the 15% that you have to pay that agent will be more than compensated by the, what the agent can get for you. So
let's assume for the sake of argument that there are going to be plenty of cases where ghostwriters, writers for hire can't get an agent or can't afford an agent for whatever reason. And let me ask Lori and Ellen, in those cases, one way that you can, I would guess, minimize the gap in leverage or disparities in leverage is being armed with information about, what's a realistic or reasonable fee for a project like this. We know that all projects are different, but there are sort of ranges that are sort of fairly common. So are there any benchmarks out there that you know of or resources that writers can use so that when they are involved in a tough negotiation, they can have a sense of sort of the ballpark they should be working in?
I've seen lists. I don't really go by them. I think that they are generally so broad that they're not going to be useful. But what I suggest that you do is everybody in this room who is writing today, tomorrow, if you haven't been doing this already, start keeping track of your time that you're working. And I don't mean just looking at the clock and writing down, I'm working from 9 to 3. I mean putting down what it is you are doing when you're working, so that what you're going to be doing is keeping task-based logs. So you'll know, for example, that you are spending 20 hours on background reading and another 10 hours surfing the web, and maybe 15 hours doing a rough outline. I'm just throwing these numbers out whether they make sense or not. You have all these numbers based on your own experience, so when it comes time for you to then price another job, you can go back and see how long did it really take me to do these tasks that I'm going to be doing now. Plus, you'll see the tasks. You may forget, oh yeah, it took me 20 hours to do such and such. We have a lot of people in this room who do interviews, right? Okay, there's some line that goes onto my log sheets now from years of experience. I know this is essential. And that is attempt to schedule interviews. Right? How much time do you waste trying to get an interview? It's not the actual interview. You can actually spend as much time trying to get the interview as doing the interview. And so if you keep things in mind that are going to be part of a job, then you can create your own benchmarks, that you'll know that it took me so many hours to do similar tasks for another job. And it may be a totally different job. It may be a smaller job or a larger job. It may be working with a subject expert or not working with a subject expert. But at least you'll know from your own experience what your own benchmarks are, and you can work within that framework.
Ellen, any benchmarks that you would recommend or you've used in the past, or tricks that you want to recommend?
When I started out, I was a thank you very much writer, and I was delighted to be paid to write a book, and I don't do that anymore. And which is not to say that I don't say thank you, but I don't, I don't believe in ballpark figures, and the reason I don't is that I think that ballparks get writers into places they can't get out of. And I certainly think, I mean, I came out of a freelance magazine writing background, and there's nothing that makes you crazier than the rate sheets that the editors are walking around with. Oh, this is $1 a word, it's a $1.50 a word. I mean, once they start saying that there's a ballpark, you're stuck in it. And so I actually don't do that. And I don't worry a lot about what other people are charging. I charge what I think my services are worth and what I think the project is going to be. And if I get, oh, that's too expensive, or that's not going to work for me, I will do what discuss it with the client, see if you can work it out. But if they can't, then we're not destined to do business together. And and that's that these things happen. I think that you have to be at the top of your game. You have to be really good at what you do, and you have to come to the client with a sense of confidence that you're pricing your products properly, and that you're going to give them a good service as a result. And I think that too often writers come to it from a beggar attitude. Like, oh, I really want this job, and I can do it for you really cheap. And I think that undermines the process. So I worry about coming up with rate sheets and ballparks and sort of frameworks like that, because I think they fence us in. And I think that really we ought to come to it from a sense of this is what we are worth. If you come to the client from that situation, you can't do that on your first day out of the box, obviously. But I think you work your way up to that position, that negotiating position.
And how often do you confer with your peers? Like you have a project that's a little out of the box or different, something you've done before. Will you call up or send an email to a few fellow ghostwriters and sort of say, what do you think?
No, I've never done that.
Never done that?
Not that I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I certainly talk it over, with friends or something. But I think, like I said, I think that people come to, particularly ghostwriting, people come to ghostwriting from different areas of expertise and different strengths. I'm faster than most, so when I do a project and I price it as a project price, I already know I'm probably going to come out ahead because I tend to write faster than other people I know. But I do know but then on the other hand, I tend to work much better in with a subject matter expert and a defined time frame, and I know that's the project that's going to work for me. Whereas other writers I know get deeply involved with their subjects and then, you know, really travel with them and become much more involved in their lives, and that's a project that works for them. These are all projects that need to be priced completely differently, and writers that need to price their services completely differently because they're coming at the process from a different set of skills. So while I talk about pricing with my fellow ghostwriters in order to gripe and complain about how much money I'm not making, I don't do it to test the waters. I've never done that.
Linda, when you're first dealing with a potential collaborator on a project, and then you start talking about money, if they come in with a fairly aggressive fee request, does that change the way you look at them as a potential collaborator for good or for ill?
Yes, I look at them much more favorably. I like writers with self-confidence, and I like writers who help guide me toward a better fee for themselves. I often ask writers early in the process, how much money do you want for this book? Or assuming it's an average, and we're all saying that there's no such thing as an average project, but people will say to me, once they get a gist of what the project is, they'll say, well, I've talked to the expert and I know that it's 75,000 words and I know the deadline is in 7 months, and putting it all together, I can't do this for a penny under 40,000. And I say, okay. And I don't try to talk them up. I don't try to talk them down. I say, if that's your bottom line, of course I'll try to do better for you if I can, if I'm negotiating for them. But I respect the fact that they have a benchmark for themselves, because it kind of forces me to do a better job for them, not just for the expert I'm representing, but for them as well, because I like everybody to feel fairly compensated. And I think Ellen did touch on this, that it really does start with you and your own sense of your own worth. And there is no way to determine that except by you yourself. And it's based on your own experience, and it's based on what you know you can do, and it's based on how fast you are, or how good a writer you are, or what kind of experiences you've had as a collaborator in the past. But it really does start with you, and there is no going rate. The going rate is what you think is fair, and the going rate is what you think it's worth to you for your time and your expertise. I had one client who was famous or notorious for asking for ridiculous sums for his book proposals. And again, you could say there's a range, there's a going rate for what writers tend to get for writing a book proposal with somebody. It tends to be a separate fee from working with them on the book. So there is an average, let's say. This guy always asked about 50 to 100% more than what the going rate was. And I remember once he said, I think this guy has a lot of money. I'm going to ask him for, and he pulled some number out of a hat, and I said, good luck. And guess what? He got it.
Right.
He got it. He got it. Why? Because as we learn in ASJA, ask and you shall receive. I have been saying that to my clients, just as I learned it in ASJA, ask and you shall receive. What's the worst that can happen? They say no. Yes, you could lose the job, but if you're reasonably willing to negotiate, then you're not going to lose the job, because chances are they want to make it work. If they're talking about it to you to this extent, they want to figure out a way to make it work for everybody. They don't want you coming into the project upset and thinking that you're being mistreated from the get-go. They want you to feel that you're being well compensated or decently compensated. You're not going to take the job if you don't think you're decently compensated, and they don't want an angry, frustrated co-writer. So the goal is to make it work for everybody. So as long as everybody is open-minded and negotiable, you can make it work for you. So why not start high? You can only go down from there. If you start too low in your negotiation, you cannot go up. People will think that you would be happy with that number. Think about it. So start high, start higher than you think you could possibly get in some cases, because you might be pleasantly surprised. Your co-writer might be willing, because of your expertise and because what you bring to the project, to pay you that amount.
How many people in the audience have heard of this term, the luxury pricing phenomenon? There's an idea in business psychology that if you ask for large sums of money for your services, you communicate that you are of high value. And the person listening to the request will think you're worth more than you are because you're charging at a premium rate. And it's not relative to your experience or anything other than that. You know, wow, this person's asking for a lot of money, they must be worth it. I had never experienced this personally because for a long time until I was a reporter out of college and I worked in government for 11 years, and then I started being an entrepreneur and working for myself. And you know, at first I was totally on my own, and I was you know, not necessarily doing writing work, doing consulting work, but I wanted clients, and I was working with nonprofits a lot, which is a whole nother subject. So I had to be very reasonable. But then when I started Gotham Ghostwriters, and I was dealing with a lot more corporate clients, and you know, I learned very quickly that the luxury pricing phenomenon does not apply universally. There are definitely a lot of clients who are price sensitive and they'll get scared. But I would say if you're dealing with corporate clients, you're dealing with individuals who are have a lot of resources, that are used to traveling in elite circles, they will be more inclined to hire you and pay what you ask if you overcharge. So I have to say I totally agree with Linda that in most cases there is almost no downside to coming in and being aggressive, but communicating that at the same time, you know, that's an opening bid. And that if that's too high, and I've had this happen in several projects we worked on at Gotham where, you know, I came in with a very aggressive figure. They said, well, that's a little more than I want to pay. How about this? And their how about this was more than what I would have asked for if I was just negotiating with, you know, an average circumstance. So I find that it really does tend to pay off. Before I ask any other questions, I did want to ask Alexandra, based on ASJA as an institution, do you provide any resources to writers in terms of benchmarks or price ranges?
We do not publish any benchmarks or price ranges.
Hold on just a second.
We do not circulate any benchmarks or price ranges. That's price fixing, so we can't do that. But we do encourage our members to share with one another, and probably the single most valuable benefit of being a member of an organization like ASJA, where you are in with your professional colleagues. They are likely to know exactly what you're talking about when you ask what's a going rate for a speech or a website or whatever the project may be, as opposed to asking people in another kind of group where they may just be starting out or they have the same exact question that you do, and everybody's just the blind leading the blind. But a really good resource for finding out what the professional job goes for is by asking professionals and getting yourself into a situation where you can do that.
I'm going to go to audience questions in just a minute, but I want to ask a couple specific follow-up questions. Let me start with Ellen. So with book ghostwriting in particular, there's another layer of complexity because there's, you know, baseline compensation and then there's shares of sales, right? So you have different negotiating pieces to consider.
Right.
Do you have any tips on how you balance those out and use that as potential leverage in getting yourself better terms or better compensated from a client who may be initially reluctant to spend a lot out of pocket?
Right. Royalties are a way you can work on the base price. If the client is concerned about the base price, you can start to work around and say, well, what if we did it for a smaller base price and a higher royalty percentage? But that's something that, you know, that I only go into when I have some idea or at least some instinct of where the book is going to go royalty-wise, because, you know, nothing from nothing leads nothing. So, you know, you can't negotiate away you never want to get all your money out of the royalty side. Because the truth is, in a lot of cases, there isn't going to be any royalty side, no matter how good the book is, because that's the nature of the business.
What percentage of projects you've worked on have you seen royalty payments
Royalty
on?
checks? Oh, probably about a third, I'd have to say. Not all my projects go through traditional publishing. There's a lot of custom publishing that's being done these days, and obviously there's not a lot of royalty arrangement, although you can do it there, but I tend not to go into a royalty arrangement when it's a custom published job. But of the projects that go through a traditional publisher, I'd say maybe a third have gotten past their advance and started to pay out royalty.
And then how about the use of bonuses? Say, for example, if you get a proposal, have you ever, as you know, if your client doesn't want to pay as much for a proposal, you might like to kind of counter then with, you know, if the proposal's bought, you get paid a success bonus.
I have done that. I have a success bonus in the proposal. I also do a bonus in the full book contract if the book meets a certain benchmark, hits a certain bestseller list, sells a certain number of copies, whatever. I mean, the clients have different measurements for what successful is going to be, but I do that a lot, where there are elements of the way the client will measure whether or not the book is successful, and so my bonuses are based on that. And often clients are happy to do that because it allows them to write into the contract what they want to see happen as well, and so they feel like they're also driving the project forward. It's actually kind of instructive as the writer. You get a real good sense of what the client hopes is going to happen in the long run.
Linda, with the rise of self-publishing, right? It's added all kinds of opportunities, and a lot more books are being written by a wider range of people. But it also means that there's not often an advance to deal with to compensate a collaborator on. So, in terms of ghostwriters today, particularly those on the newer side, how do you condition their expectations? You know, what's a realistic way to approach this, knowing that for a lot of book projects that you're going to get asked to work on, there is not going to be that pot of money that there necessarily used to be?
Don't do it. It still comes down to what you feel the project is worth, and so whether it's a self-published book or a book that's published traditionally with a trade publisher, you still have to gauge whether it's worth your while. And so, you know, you might be dealing with someone who wants you to write his or her book, and that person doesn't have any money. So how do you as the writer get paid? And I am a big advocate of getting paid for the work you do. And so I do have some clients who, for whatever reason, are willing to work on projects for little or nothing. And I try very hard to discourage them from doing that because I just do. And as selfishly speaking, 15% of nothing is nothing. So I don't really like to work with people who are not looking for a traditional publisher. So I'm not really sure that I'm answering the question, but you know, if there's a project, you know, as we've been saying, there are a lot of different reasons for writing a book. Maybe you need to get your feet wet by working with someone on a self-published project where you'll probably get paid less than if there's an advance being paid because the person is paying you out of pocket, but it might be a good credit for you. You might need a credit that you can show other people to help you get other book projects where there will be an advance and will be royalties. So it might be worth your while, but I don't really know how to advise people in that situation because I discourage them from doing that.
Honestly, Dad, one of the things, and sort of to that point, when a client will come to me and say, well, you know, I'm custom publishing, I'm not traditional publishing, so I don't have an advance to pay you out of, and I'm not going to be rude about it, but that's not my concern. So, you know, my feeling is where you get the money from to hire me, I'm not going to ask hard about. You know, you can borrow it from someone, you can raise it by getting an advance, you can, you know, you can drain your company's, you know, 401k. I don't know where the money's coming from. That's not my part of the deal. This is what my price is, and how you pay me is for you, the author expert, to figure out on your own. That doesn't alter. I don't charge less for custom publishing because they're not getting an advance. And I have had clients who I've written proposals for, and then the advance they've gotten is less than what I'm charging to write the book. And those clients have had to write a check to cover me, you know, to cover my fee, what we've agreed I'm going to write the book on. Honestly, that's a business decision on their part. If they want to hire the writer, then that's what the writer costs, and how they get the funds to cover that is not the writer's neck of the woods.
Right, that's a very good point. And I'd also like to add that if there's a way for you to come in on the ground floor, and by ground floor I mean be part of the book publishing contract, whether you have your own agent or not. You know, I know a lot of you get projects through various sources, but if you happen to meet somebody who says to you, I'd like to work with you on a book, I would immediately try to become that person's co-writer as opposed to ghostwriter with all the privileges that go along with that. You want to be part of the book contract because then you can see what's in the book contract. And this way you are not just going to be handed whatever the publisher and the author think you should be getting, but you have a little more leverage. If you know that the the book contract is very big, then obviously you're going to want a bigger part of that piece. So if you can come in when the contract is being negotiated, if you can ask to be a co-writer as opposed to a ghostwriter, if you can ask for a byline, which I encourage all writers to do, if you possibly can get it, and again, I don't know why there's this mystery surrounding ghostwriters. You know, we walk into bookstores or we order our books on Amazon and we know darn well that the main writer, who is a TV star, has not written a word of that book. So why are we all being so coy about it? So I say, if you can possibly get a co-writer byline, you should really lobby for that. You should lobby for a royalty. You should lobby for part of whatever bonuses might be in there for the lead author, because guess what? There will not be a book without you. You are the engine that is driving that machine. Now, of course, the lead author may be more important than you in terms of the project itself, but if you're going to write a good book, then you should be duly compensated. And I think you have much more leverage at the beginning if you can be part of the contract and part of the initial conversation with the co-author and with the publisher.
I would just add to that point that you know, the idea of being a co-writer or getting credit or being part of the contract is an asset. It's something of value to the writer that is not automatically you know, translate financially, but it's something of value that you can trade if a client is not willing to kind of meet your price demand. So, for example, if you want $50,000 for a book and they're only willing to go to $40,000, you could say, well, I'm willing to do it for $40,000 if you put me in the contract, if I get co-writing credit, because that will pay off in different ways. Just like Linda was saying. I do want to go back to the point about dealing with people who are self-publishing and don't have advances. You know, this is something that we Gotham ghostwriters are running to more and more as with the democratization of the publishing industry. It's like so many more people now are writing a book, and they're like, they get started and then they realize they can't write the book. And then they come to a service like ours and they're trying to find a ghostwriter, and they say, well, I only have this limited budget, and they have no idea really how much a professional ghostwriter, how much time they're going to put into a project, and how much they need to get compensated for their services. And a lot of times, those are the people who do get scared. So one of the things I suggest to them, and just as food for thought for writers who are going to be dealing with this, is a way to split the baby is to encourage them to do a lot of the writing themselves, to the extent they can, to assemble the raw material and limit the amount of time that you have to put on a project. So that you can add value to it without losing the ability to do other work, and take a smaller fee than you would if you wrote a manuscript from scratch. And that solution actually is very appealing to a lot of people when they understand that they're not going to be able to get someone to ghostwrite their book for $5,000 and have it be in proper English grammar. One last area I want to cover before we go to the audience for questions is beyond what to charge, how you charge, right? The units that you're selling your services in. So, and again, this will vary a lot based on whether you're talking about a book, a speech, other forms of writing that writers typically get paid for. But let's talk about books and speeches, since those are probably two of the most common ones. Lori, let me start with you. What do you see as sort of the pros and cons of charging by the hour versus charging on a project basis?
Okay. If you're very fast, like Ellen is, then you certainly want to charge on a project basis, because you'll be putting in less time and getting more money. If you are slow, you might prefer charging on an hourly basis, because then you're going to be paid for every hour of time that you put in. But there's so many other parameters that go into that. I mean, what are you going to get from the person that you're working for? Are you going to have to be doing some of that work for yourself? Will the client be giving you everything? This will affect how much time you put in. So you really need to know not just which is the better basis to charge on according to your speed of work, but also on what you're going to get to work with, what your ultimate goal is in terms of finished product as well.
Ellen, what do you think?
You mean in terms of hourly versus project? I tend to do project pricing on books, but you know, again, Lori makes a good point. It depends on how the client is going to work with you. Project pricing works for me when I can be fairly certain how the project's going to roll out. You know what I mean? If there's a pretty reasonable deadline, I understand all the material. Hourly makes more sense if things are a little fuzzy and you're not really sure. They're probably going to work out okay, but you're not really sure how the client is going to be. And so in that case, for example, availability of the client is a big one. If it seems like there's going to be any difficulty getting that client's availability, then I want to make it an hourly so that I'm not losing money because I can't find the client or I can't get him on his can't get on his calendar. So and sometimes I'll even mix it up. Some elements of the project will be project based, and some other elements will be hourly based. I do find though that if I can do it on a project price, I prefer to. I like everybody to sort of understand what the parameters of the project are before we get into it. I don't like the feeling I get from clients sometimes that they don't want me in meetings because I'm going to be running the clock, you know, that they don't want, they're trying to look for ways to keep their money under control. So I like everybody to feel comfortable that they know what the parameters are. That said, I always have something in my contract that says, this is the project price, these are the parameters of the project. If you want more than that, then my meter starts running hourly. And I find that that's very effective. You know, once that meter goes on, everybody finishes up real quick because they don't want this to get out of control. So I think that a mix of the two often really works.
Okay.
I echo that.
All right. Well, maybe this is a natural transition point to bring in our audience and get some questions from them. But one of the things I would like to maybe start off with is ask some of our Gotham friends here. I'll get to you in just a second. I want to ask some of our Gotham friends here, some of our more experienced writers, to weigh in on this question of hourly versus project basis, and are there times where you have written it on an hourly basis where you think it makes sense? So why don't we start with Erin Martin?
I've never done anything on
Hold on for the microphone.
Thanks. I've never done anything on an hourly basis. I tend to do a project fee. I try to make a very good assessment from the outset of how much time I think it's going to take, and then go with a project fee exactly for the reason that you mentioned, Ellen, of having everybody be comfortable and not be worrying about the bottom line.
Right.
Carrie, would you like to weigh in on this?
Same thing.
Hold on for the microphone.
Yeah. I give the same exact answer. The only thing is with regards to the project price, having some sort of a word count parameter,
Right.
because I
Right.
did once have a job where a person ended up with something like around 175,000 words, and you know that's War and Peace. You know? So you know, again, I usually will say on a project basis is that the project will range between this and this word count, and if it goes above that word count, here's a fee per word that goes above that.
Does anyone want to weigh in on this particular question? And then we'll go to.
Hi, I'm Lisa Page, and I'm actually new with Gotham Ghostwriters. I'm doing my first book-length project right now, and I really want to talk to you. But I just said to my client, I'm taking the full advance, and so now we're in a position where I need to go get myself a full advance. But you're absolutely right. I mean, he wouldn't have had a book without me, and we're starting to be in pretty good position, and I am so glad that I said that, and he just like leapt at it because he knew he wasn't going to have a book without me, even though he's nationally known. So, you know, what I'm hearing tonight about don't underestimate what you can get and ask, it relates, I've worked in nonprofit as well, and I know, if you give something away, people think it's worthless. And if you price it low, people think it's worth very little. So, you start high, and I think this is gonna work out for me. But in terms of the hourly, I also kind of wish I had done what you mentioned about saying, I'll do it for the advance, and then, by the way, anything beyond X number of hours per week, because this man is outrageous, and he's driving me crazy. So the next time I do this,
That's important. Yeah.
I know better.
If you want to curb an outrageous client that's taking a lot of your time, a really good way to do that is in the pricing.
Yeah, I think it's
They
too
pay
late on
attention to
this
that.
project for that, but live and learn.
Yeah, in the contract, some of the contracts we've done, I built in an escalator clause, so that we have a defined scope of work, but if for some reason it extends beyond that, it's spelled out that anything beyond this, or particularly if it's beyond, like we have a deadline, and they want work done beyond the deadline, then we charge an hourly rate. So like they know they're going to pay even a higher price if they drag things out. So let me start with the back here. You had your hand up first, and just.
Yes.
And then we'll go to Alexandra for a question for the audience, from the online audience.
I'm a freelance writer, and lately I've been getting a lot of offers to do blogs. And I was really hoping to hear tonight the pricing. They say, how much do you charge a word? And it really is very difficult to figure out, so I would love to get some input.
I do ghostwrite blogs sometimes. I don't do it a lot, but I ghostwrite blogs, particularly for clients for whom I've written books. That's very common. If they want to do guest posts someplace or something like that, I'm back on the project again, and I don't ghostwrite blogs on a per word basis. I do it on an hourly basis, because the truth is that it doesn't really matter how many words it is. It just matters how long it takes you to get it done. It could be 100 words and it took you all day, and it could be 500 words and I did it while watching Oprah, you know what I mean, because it was easy. So I always do it by the hour, because that's really, you know, what it's worth to me.
And if I may add to that, a lot of my collaborative teams work out an arrangement up front whereby the writer, part of what the writer will be expected to do is to do blogging for the book to help promote the book when the book is published. And so the writer and the expert understand that that's a separate activity from writing the proposal, and it's separate from writing the book itself. It's yet more time expenditure for the writer. And so I suggest you try to work that out in advance, that if you're the person you're writing the book for, your co-writer, whoever, is expecting you to do some publicity for the book, that you build in an extra fee for that.
And I would just add,
I'm kind of with Ellen. I mean, I think it makes sense to charge by the hour, because you know how many hours it will take you. I don't know what my clients charge, because I don't get involved with that.
Hourly rates are all over the board. It depends on what you, I mean, people have different hourly rates for different projects. It depends on how hard or easy it is for you.
but I will add this, that I think you're probably going to have to do a little testing in terms of what the market will bear, right? You'll have to play with it a little bit. But at this, I think the first step goes to what, you know, you got boxed into a corner by doing it by the word, right? And I think the way you protect yourself is, as soon as that comes up, either to offer it first proactively, or as soon as the client suggests going that direction, sort of say, no, I think, you know, my clear preference is to charge by the hour. So you're setting the context of the negotiation on your terms, and not getting bullied into something where, you know, it's going to be more difficult for you.
How can you figure out what the market will be?
Well, I think if you say you have 3 different clients, right, and you ask for $100 an hour, and they say no, and then you say $30 an hour, and they say yes right away, you've already established some parameters. That's what I mean. I mean, this goes to Ellen's point. There's not, you know, other communication service industry, other sectors of the communications industry, they have more established pricing norms, and in this field, there's not. It's much more, there's much wider variation. So you have to kind of do some testing of your own in the market you're dealing in, and what your clients will pay. But based on our earlier conversation, the best advice I think I can give is err on the side of asking for really what you want, and then you'll get a sense of, you know, right away, you know, how far they're willing to go to meet you. Let's take a question from our online viewers. From
we have a question from Jackie in Florida. This goes back to the discussion of how to tame an unruly client and how to put parameters around the job. The question is, what tips or suggestions do you have for dealing with a situation where the scope of the project changes while it's in progress, and it's more work than you originally agreed to do?
Okay, as soon as the scope of the project starts changing, you immediately have to bring it up. Don't sit there saying, wow, here goes the scope of my project right out the window, because sometimes the client doesn't realize it, and sometimes the client realizes it perfectly well, and it's just going to pretend it's not happening. So it's was it you who called it scope creep? Somebody,
yes.
Somebody I work with called it scope creep. When things start, oh, a little bit more. So when that starts happening, you really do have to say to the client, this is beyond the scope of our original agreement. I'm delighted to do this for you, and this is what I will charge you for it. You know what I mean? You don't have to say, I refuse to do it. But you can absolutely say, this is outside what we've agreed to. And so would you like to add this to the project? Are we adding this to the project? And the client says, yes, I really desperately need this. It totally is necessary to the project. Great, this is what I think it's worth. And the client says, I don't want to pay that, and you can say, okay, no problem, but then I'm not going to do it. So I think that when you see scope creep happening, you have to speak up right away. And you don't have to make it a nasty conversation. You can make it a revelatory conversation. I've noticed that this is starting to happen outside of the bounds of our original agreement. How should we, approach this?
And the other thing about that is that you need to put into your contract or letter of agreement exactly what the scope is. That you have to define the parameters very carefully so that when it starts to creep beyond that, you can point to something that the client has agreed to and said, this is not what we had agreed to. We need to negotiate again.
Put it on paper, be specific. And I've actually had this happen where I will cut and paste the relevant provision from the agreement and email it to the client, just want to alert you, this is what the scope of work is defined as, just like, and then pivot to what Ellen said, happy to take on more, but this is, outside the bounds that we would have to talk about it, adding to the scope of work.
Right. And also keep in mind that while the person who hired you to do this job might be satisfied with what you've done, you're still responsible for working with the publisher. The manuscript is going to come back and there are going to be copy edits that you're going to have to deal with. It's not going to be the person who hired you to do the job. You're going to be the one responsible for working with the copy editor. And so that's going to take your time. So always build that in as part of the job you're doing.
I'd also like to just personally observe with regard to the blogging discussion, there's more than 2 ways to price that. You can also think about pricing it by post. See how much blogging the client actually expects from you. If you can do that in 10 minutes a week, great. Charge them for 5 hours. If you can do it in, it's going to take you 20 hours a week, charge them a full-time job. I mean, think about oh my God, as Ellen said, it's how quick you are, but charging by the hour, if you're fast, works completely against you. So I wouldn't think of that as being the only way to do it. You can charge by production too.
Carrie and then Lisa.
Sure.
I'm sorry. The woman behind you had her hand up first. So.
Barbara Junkvit, I'm actually also a translator, and scope creep comes up a lot. One thing I do is I say, okay, this is how much I charge for the translation. If you want me to make it pretty, if you want me to make the pictures fit, this is how much I charge extra. Put it right in the front, saying, this is the basic service, these are the add-ons I'm willing to provide, and these are the prices for the add-ons. You might want to do the same thing for ghostwriting. Or the blog, you can also blog. It depends not only on how you charge for the writing of the blog, but a lot of blogs these days include more than writing. There's video, there are images, there are all sorts of programming things you can do with a blog these days. So in addition to just the writing fee, you may want to have add-ons for some of those kinds of services and say, okay, this is just the basic pricing. If you want me to put in pictures, if you want me to put in videos, whatever, you got to pay extra, and this is how much extra.
Carrie and then Lisa.
Okay, thank you. Problem I've been seeing lately, and maybe Linda, you might be the best one to direct this to. A person who's, say, a newsmaker or an expert puts it kind of out there that they're thinking about writing a book. And then me and everybody else comes and chases after them, says, I'd like to write it, and then here's a bidding war and whatever. But there's other situations where there's a newsmaker and you say to yourself, oh, wait a minute, my cousin's best friends with that person. So you reach out to that person and say, hey, you ought to write a book. And they go, I never thought of that. And then you say, and I'm a book writer, and I'd be happy to work with you on it. And they go, hey, that's a great thing. And then the third thing is you say, and I charge, and they go, whoa, wait a minute. I'm just digesting the first two things first. And now suddenly you're saying, you want my money? It just totally is a different dynamic than when they've thought of the concept. How do you, is there an answer to that?
It's true, and it's awkward for agents too, because I often put teams together. I do exactly what you're describing.
Right.
I read about a newsmaker or somebody who I think should be writing a book, and I say, I'm a New York literary agent and you should be writing a book. And they say, oh, good idea. And then we establish that they cannot write their way out of any kind of bag. And I say, don't worry, I have lots of good writers on my team and I can put you in touch with any number of writers. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to pay that person X thousands of dollars to write your book proposal. And then they say, see you around. So you do scare people off that way sometimes. And frankly, I don't know a way around it, and if you can think of a way around it,
so there's no magic answer.
There's no magic answer because, of course, they're going to freak out when you say, you know, like, work with me, and I'm a great agent, and I'm going to find you a great writer, and I'll find you a great publisher, and it's going to cost you some money up front. And then I try to reassure them by saying, and if all goes the way we all expect it to go, you will more than make that money back. But I am, as I said, a very strong advocate for writers, and I say, writers, just like you, have to get paid. You get paid for doing what you do so well. Writers have to take time to write your proposal, and they have to get paid to write your book. And you have to be prepared to pay them. And as it separates the men from the boys and the girls from the women. And sometimes they say, I get it, and that's perfectly fair and perfectly right. And how much do your writers tend to charge? And we go from there. And sometimes they say, I'll get back to you, and they disappear in a cloud of smoke. So, you know, what can you do? I honestly do not know a way around it. I would never bring in somebody and say, and by the way, I will find you a writer who will do it for free, because I don't represent writers that way. I think the writers should get paid. So, again, it's a little awkward. That conversation can be quite awkward. It has worked for me sometimes, and it has failed for me sometimes. I just don't know any other way around it.
This isn't a magic bullet, but I think one strategy you can think about employing is, and by the way, I'd be happy to work with you on identifying resources to cover the costs, the startup costs of the project, right? Because now, you know, there's Kickstarter, for example, right? You can go, there's mechanisms online that you can take advantage of to get people to help cover the initial cost of, say, doing a proposal by fundraising, or going to their friends and colleagues and setting up as a limited partnership and getting them to be investors. People aren't used to thinking of it that way. They won't come to that on their own, but that's one way that you can possibly diffuse the situation and kind of make it less scary to them to sort of say, there are different outlets out there and opportunities to fund a project so that you minimize how much you have to pay. I
actually use, I find that it doesn't always work. There is no magic bullet, but I find that one way around sort of the awkward moment is I use business language right away. I usually say, you should hire me to write your book. Do you know what I mean? I say it that way, rather than I'd like to work with you, or I think your book would be great, and all those things are positive. But I usually use more direct language that says I'm for sale, so that if they want to continue the conversation, we've established that that's what I do. And if they say, oh, you know, I could never afford to hire a writer, I can, you know, we can continue the conversation, no problem there, but we've sort of established up front that that's what we're talking about, so that there isn't that awkward moment when the expert suddenly realizes that there'd be money involved. It at least gets that out of the way. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
That's a good idea.
And then Erin.
I wanted to add to the blogging question, because I've worked with very expensive people in the capital of Pennsylvania who sell their services as social media experts. And there are, you know, lobbying firms that do social media as well. They're very expensive. They do what we do, and they get paid a lot. So what you want to do is talk to some people who work in those kinds of companies, and, you know, they're so busy, honestly, that they can't handle all the people all the clients that they have, especially in times like right now when they're pushing for budgets, you know, when they're doing their lobbying work and not their social media work. They're perfectly happy to tell you the outrageous fees that they charge. And the other thing that you were saying about, you know, you find somebody who's going to be a good subject of a book, you know, you can invest in one of those t-shirts that says, be careful or you'll be the subject of my novel, because you can go out and write that person's story and change the names and really have a great published book. And if that person wants to be in, you know, make some money from his or her own story, then, you know, that's a bargaining chip right there.
It's aggressive.
We'll go to Erin, and then Alexandra, do you have any?
I wanted to ask about proposal writing versus book writing. I've always maintained, particularly in this very challenging publishing environment, that the proposal writing represents a very serious piece of intellectual property. And I'm wondering how, if you have strategies for pricing proposals versus the book writing itself, or if there's any kind of percentage basis that you think about as you approach the proposal writing process and the book writing process.
Should I answer
Anybody,
that?
yeah.
Well, the proposal is, as you say, a separate piece of work, and it really is not based on the book price, at least not in my experience. I mean, as I say, there tends to be a range that writers charge to write, you know, a 40-page book proposal that includes a sample chapter.
Linda, just for some perspective,
Sure.
without naming names, what is the highest price you've seen an
proposal go
author pay a collaborator?
$17,000.
Okay.
Which I thought was amazing. That was the story I was telling you before, which is so far out of what most of my writers do charge and get for their proposals. And I'm not saying it wasn't worth it. It was worth it to the person who paid it. It's just a separate piece of work. And it really has no bearing on the book itself in terms of the way it should be priced. There's a lot of effort, as you know, if you've written book proposals, that go into a book proposal. And a lot of writers love writing books and they hate writing proposals. They're very formulaic. They involve a great deal of research that's separate from the research that might be involved in writing the book. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do think that anybody who hires you and says, well, just write the proposal and it's part and parcel of the whole thing, it doesn't understand the complexity and the amount of work involved in writing the proposal.
Ellen, Lori, do you want to weigh in?
No, I would go along with that the proposal is a significant amount of work and that you should be paid fairly for the amount of work that you're putting into that, whether or not it ever goes beyond the proposal stage.
I charge separately for book proposals and books because they are completely different documents. And I often say to the client, the book is the book, but the book proposal is a sales document. It's a completely different animal. And I love book proposals. I make a lot of money on them because the truth is a lot of clients will come in and do just the book proposal. And then if it's a big corporation, they'll then take my blueprint in-house. Or sometimes they decide it was more work than they thought it was going to be and they never do anything. So book proposals I find are a really good way to sort of flesh out the full career of a ghostwriter because they're faster. You get them done faster. Once you get sort of into the formula, there is a formula, absolutely. When you kind of get into the formula and you can put yourself in proposal mode and really make a good sales document, it's very useful for the client. It's something that people will come to you for if they think you can do it well.
And it also lays out the book. I mean, I don't know how people write books without a proposal because one part of the proposal is the table of contents.
Right, the detailed chapter outline.
And the detailed chapter outline really tells you where the book is going and it answers the questions for the editors about what is this book going to be about and how are you going to fill 225 pages.
Ellen, a situation we've been running into more frequently is clients who love the writer that we've identified for them, and they want to lock in, they want to do the proposal and the manuscript. And they want to negotiate a price for both. And my feeling has been that not only are they two separate things, it's hard to negotiate fair compensation for a book until you know what it's going to be sold for and what the advance is going to be and what the sales prospects are. So have you run into this, and do you have strategies that you advise dealing with when you have a client saying, which is a good situation to have, is I love you and I want to lock you up,
right?
To sort of say, well, let's date before we marry.
Right. Yes, I have run into that, and it's difficult, and it requires some sort of deep thinking on my part on what I really want and how badly I want that book. Do I feel that it's going to be successful under those circumstances? I have done combos where I've done a price for the book proposal and a price for the book, and it is a risk on my part. I'm taking a risk because the book may not work out the way I think it will work out. The client may not be what I think the client's going to be, and sometimes in the proposal process, that's where you find that out. You find out just how easy or hard that client is to work with. But on the other hand, it could also go really well, and I think then you come back and you ask high on the book deal, because the truth is you have to protect yourself at some level. It could go really well or it could go really badly, and so if they want to lock you up, then the price for locking you up is a higher project fee. For that, I will be locked up.
Linda, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I always have my teams, when I'm representing both parties, sign a collaboration agreement right off the bat that covers the terms of writing the book proposal and then separately covers the terms of writing the book. And it allows for either party to get out of the relationship somewhere between the proposal and the book, because oftentimes you don't want to work with that person. Once you get past the proposal stage, you say, thank goodness that's over with. And thank goodness I have wording in my collaboration agreement that gives me an out, even though the publisher might really want you to stay on the project because you wrote such a fantastic proposal and such a fantastic sample chapter, but you might be therefore in a position where you say, thank you very much. I am more than happy to take my money for the proposal and let you find another writer to take my place because life is too short. So I think you need to have an out if you want an out, and I think you should also have an in if you want an in. So I encourage my writer parts of the team to have language that says that I am your first choice if the book is sold, because then you will most likely stay on the project because the expert wants you and the publisher wants you. So, so you have that as some kind of insurance. I also encourage the writer to have language in there that talks about to cover the contingency of the book selling for a huge sum of money or not so huge sum of money. So what I tell them is, don't think so much in terms of splits. Don't think about 50-50 or 60-40. Think about what the minimum you would want to write this book could be and give yourself an opportunity to make more. So for example, I would say, what is your rock bottom to write this book? If your rock bottom is to write the book for $30,000, you can say the writer will get $30,000 or half of the advance, whichever is higher. I mean, how could you go wrong with something like that? You're protected by naming a number that you know you will be satisfied with, and if the book sells for a lot more, you stand to do a lot better.
That's really, really great advice. It's one little trick that we use in the agreements we do at Gotham is very similar to what Linda recommended in terms of first choice. We call it a right of first refusal. So we build into the agreement that if the book gets sold based on the fruits of our labor, that we have first option to work on the manuscript, but it doesn't lock us in. So we have that out. I want to go to Alexandra. So a couple questions from.
We have two people online wondering what a range is for book proposals. I heard you say 17 is high. So is it fair to say 8 to 15?
I do 7 to 15 is my range.
7 to 15.
I've
okay,
done it cheaper in my early days. Do you know what I mean? When I was starting out, when I hadn't done very many.
Okay.
I will add though that a number of agents that I've been talking to recently have been expecting lower than that. Okay. So, and I think that is reflective of the economy.
Yes,
putting
in the early 2000s it was 5-ish, and now we're sort of back there, maybe.
I think. That's
okay. Another
case.
question was about what the value is. What's the biggest value a ghostwriter can sell about themselves? Is it strictly commercial success of the books they've written, or is there a way to sell their quality of their work? I mean, what's the most valuable thing?
Well, what I sell when I'm talking about what's most valuable about me is my ability to get the book out of your head and onto the page. Because I find that when people come to a ghostwriter or a co-writer or a collaborative agreement, that's their biggest concern. Their biggest concern is, I know I've got a book. I know I've got a book. I can't get it. I can't get it on paper. Either they've tried and they can't do it, or they know they don't have the time to do it. They lack the hours they can put into it. They lack the writing chops, whatever the issue is. And so what I always sell is, I can be the champion for that book. You bring me in on the project, and I will figure out a way to get the book out of your head and onto the page and out on the shelf where you want it to be. And that's going to be a different arrangement for every client. But that's really what I sell. And I do it based on the fact that I've done it for a lot of other clients. And I'm pretty confident I can do it for this one. That's how I sell it.
Well, Linda, this seems right up your alley as a consumer of ghostwriters. So when you're looking at people to work with your clients, what's the thing that leaps out at you in terms of their qualifications?
What leaps out, I have to answer that question in two different ways. What leaps out at me is putting two personalities together. I do, I have a lot of health writers. I have a lot of business writers. I have a lot of self-help writers. So I do try to I feel like a matchmaker. I feel like I'm a literary matchmaker looking for two personalities that won't drive each other crazy, that might actually like each other, and that really is a key factor for me in putting people together. Of course, I try to introduce the expert to several writers, and I let that person make the decision. But I do a screening process, and I try to offer that expert 2 or 3 writers who I think he or she will get along with. But I can tell you that a lot of times people come to me looking for writers from my stable, and they say, have you had any New York Times bestsellers? And it's going to come down to that. It's going to come down to, have you worked on a book that was a big, big success? And you will get more money if you can brag that you've written books that have been on bestseller lists. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there's no getting around it. That is a criterion that is very important to a lot of other agents who are bringing people to me so that they can collaborate with my authors. And it's important to publishers, and it's important to a lot of people, what your track record is as a writer on the books that you've worked on.
Lori, what do you think?
Yeah, in terms of quality, you certainly can sell quality just in terms of having the expert, the person who wants you to write their book, look at what you've done. It's not just what you've written. Does your voice sound like their voice? Does that person who's going to hire you want to have you express his or her thoughts in the way that you do or in the way that he or she does? I had an experience early on where somebody hired me for a ghost, and he gave me probably 4 full days worth of tapes that he had of conferences, presentations at conferences. And on the basis of that, I started to write the introductory chapter, and he read it and he said, this isn't me. And I said, well, this is exactly the way you sound. He said, I know, but I don't want to write the way I sound. And so we changed the parameters of the job, and instead of my ghosting the whole thing, I became his editor. I would write the first draft, but leave out parts that I know he wanted to write. He would then take, so I would give him maybe a 20-page chapter. He would then take it and elaborate on it, turn it into a 60-page chapter where there were at least 45 adjectives on every page, and the word extremely was used at least once every 2 pages. And then I would take that and edit it down, and by the time we were done, we had a really good voice, and that made him happy. It was the quality that he wanted. He didn't want to sound in writing the way he did when he spoke, but he wanted his thoughts down there, making him look good.
I actually wanted to add one thing more about expertise. Sorry. One other thing that I think is important about create what you're selling and sort of selling quality is if you come from an area of expertise, that's also a huge selling point. And I find that clients are often very interested in the fact that I used to work for Business Week. And since I write business books, and they feel like I will have an understanding of who they are, of how they want to communicate, of what the nature of their business is. So in addition to quality, I think when I can communicate my area of expertise to a client, that also is a way that you make that match that you were talking about, that the two people will understand each other.
As well as being a writer, I do freelance editing. And it's been my practice to first agree to read the manuscript for $2 or $3 a page, and give a one-page idea of what it is that I would do, and then to charge an hourly fee. I always charge an hourly fee because I'm going to be working with the people. I don't know how long it's going to take. But I'm beginning to feel that this preliminary $2 or $3. I was going to raise it to $3, but I think it's losing me money, and I'm wondering whether there's been an advantage to my doing that by the page first. I'd like to get rid of it. Can anyone help me?
So get rid of it. I think it probably turns people off that you're charging them that reading fee. You know, it's like a reading fee. And agents don't do it, and most of the writers I know don't do it. They take a project, they evaluate it in as short a time as they can, and then they discuss it with the person. But I don't think it's to your advantage to charge them even a small amount, and we're talking about a small fee.
Yeah, right.
But I think it's more of an annoyance, and it gets you off on the wrong foot. Maybe other writers disagree with me, but if I were a writer, I wouldn't do it.
But you're saying, in other words, you charge nothing for my evaluation?
Yeah, just evaluate the project as best you can. Don't spend that much time on it, and figure out how much it's worth to you.
Maybe the middle ground, though, is to not read the whole manuscript, right? Because you can, if you read 2 chapters, you can get a feel for how much editing work is going to be, and that protects you and also makes you more attractive to the client because there's not that upfront fee.
Right,
I mean, that's just one option.
Yeah, except that what I like to do is say to them, this is the way I would work with you, and in order to do that, I need to read the whole manuscript.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm thinking maybe I should charge the same hourly fee to read and evaluate, but Linda's saying that would turn people off.
I think you're probably charging them for a lot of reading that they feel you shouldn't have to do in order to evaluate it. I agree. I think I would be able to evaluate it on the basis of a couple of chapters, but maybe not. I don't know. Are you talking about fiction?
I'm talking often about fiction.
It's often fiction.
Yeah. So it's hard to know until you've read the whole thing.
Yeah.
What needs to be done.
I do think it's difficult to expect someone in your position to read an entire manuscript for free if you're purely doing an editing job, because if for an agent you're talking about a much higher potential payoff, so it's worth the investment.
Yeah.
If you the limited hours that you would work on editing to then that's relatively speaking a good chunk of the time you'd invest is reading the whole thing. So I guess my advice would be, and Laura, you weigh in, but my advice would be either charge for the whole thing if you insist on reading the whole thing, or read a couple chapters for free.
What do you call that first read? Do you call that part of the editing process?
I say I'll read and evaluate.
Okay, because you could charge a small evaluation fee.
Yeah.
Not do the whole thing, just enough so that you can get a sense, give the author your fee, your evaluation, and say, if you want me to go into more detail, I can do a thorough evaluation of the whole manuscript, for which I would charge you so much.
Yeah.
And so that you start with a smaller amount, see if the author is going to be content with it, and if you're going to be content with it, you'll get paid something for the smaller amount of work that you do. And then if you do want to proceed to do a complete evaluation, you'll give the author a more thorough evaluation. When you're done, it'll be a much more elaborate response, and so the author will come away with something that makes a higher fee worthwhile. But you can easily, I see, turn them off by charging too much to do the evaluation if they don't know this is.
That's actually the opposite of my problem. I feel that I charge too little for the evaluation that I give them.
You do, but does the author?
Oh, of course not.
We're running a little short on time, and I want to take some other questions. But no, what I was going to suggest is we're going to stick around after the workshop is formally over to answer some follow-up questions. So hold on to that. And
I just want to say something. I don't know your name, but you sound more like a book doctor. Yeah. And I think that's a whole different ball game, because usually when a person wants to have a ghostwriter, they come with a project, they give you the information, you decide whether you can write the book or not. But you seem to be getting finished project, and so you are a book doctor, and that works a whole different way.
Oh, I see. Okay, good. I couldn't see her.
It's hard to see.
Thank you.
I'd be really curious to hear from some of our writers who are not book writers, so if they're speechwriters or journalists, who and want to share any of your experiences or have any questions based on your the challenges you run into.
I have a combination of business experience as a writer, editor, corporate and private, and as a professor of public speaking and speech writing. And going back to what Lori said about I don't want to sound like myself, what was running through my mind is two things. Number one, when you're writing a speech, you're not writing for the eye. You're writing for the ear. And the tempo and the phrasing is totally different. So what made Clinton superb is that he liked to talk. And so when he was writing his speeches, not only did he have a tremendous command of the information, but he knew how to schmooze with people over a beer, over 90 hamburgers. And so he was very good at pacing himself, making other people sound awkward and literate because they spoke as if they were professors of a class or giving a lecture. And it was hard for them to break that habit. So in that sense, I think one of the things you offer when you speak to a writer or a client is, do you want to sound like yourself? I can make you sound very intelligent, very literate, and your friends will be amazed at all your hidden depths. And I think that that adds a dimension. You're writing for the ear. When you're speaking, you're writing for the eye, which scans a lot faster when you're writing a book or a magazine. And speechwriters forget that. They think that the machine's going to make the person stop where he's supposed to stop. And I have had to give practice sessions. I did one for Commissioner Abate years ago at probation, and she got a standing ovation from the people at City Hall when she was sworn in, because I coached her on phrasing to dig out the meat of the speech and present it in such a way that some of the people were crying. But she needed that extra piece, or she would have sounded like she was reading. And so that's a point that I would make in terms of speech writing. It's for the ear. Person way back there has to feel included.
Back here.
So I'm a freelance journalist and I do contract writing, and my question is following up on the profitability issue. So two parts. One is how do you research, or what questions do you ask on the front end to figure out how difficult someone's going to be to work with? Because in general I'm pretty fast, so I think the project rate goes well, but the big wild card is how much back and forth there's going to be on the end of it. And also, so I ran into a situation a couple months ago where I had been hired to write a brochure for a corporation. I gave them what I thought was a highball range, and they took it. I thought it was great. They came back. The editing was super easy. I got my check in the mail, and then about a month later, they came back and were like, oh, we have all these other edits and all these other things we wanted to change. And I did it because I felt like, I didn't want to lose them as a potential client in the future, but I also felt like, this should have all come up much earlier in the process. So I think just in general, evaluating profitability of potential clients has been a challenge, and I'd love to hear thoughts on that.
Great question. Lori, let's start with you.
In a situation like that, when you are having your initial discussion with the client and when you write your contract, you want to indicate how many revisions are going to be involved. And if you knew in the beginning that you were going to have these revisions coming up, then that wouldn't have surprised you so much when it did happen. But you also want to limit the revisions so that you can say this fee covers one set of revisions or maybe two set of revisions. And any changes beyond that, I'm going to charge separately by the hour. And so that way you won't lose any money on the revision stages of it.
Ellen?
I agree, set the number of revisions in the contract. That said, if I'm in the middle of a project and we're going back and forth, I'm not counting how many times. I mean, you know, you can kind of keep track of a client. If they're really working hard for you and they're not yanking your chain, you know, I'll hang in there and
it also
work till everybody's happy. I understand that.
Is it going to, you know, is a set of revisions like 2 sentences that they want
Right,
rewritten, or
exactly.
is it like a whole rewrite,
Exactly.
I think?
I had something recently where I had written the manuscript and the client had signed off on it, and I thought it had gone on to production, and then there was some problem with one of the chapters later because I can't remember what it was, but it was something about tables that didn't work or something, and the chapter was coming back. The chapter was coming back, and they were going to reopen the chapter. Now I'm already off the project. I've been paid. I'm finished. And the client called me, and we discussed sort of what the changes were, and they're not, I mean, she was in a complete panic, but I could see that there was a way to make this text work that was not going to be huge and was not going to be a problem. And I said, I'll come back in and do that. It's not a huge amount of work for me, and you know, we can wrap this up. At the same time, there are clients who will take advantage of you and will just come back to you for more and more. And the fact is, it sounds like your client didn't carefully review the brochure before they moved on, right? Well, that's not your fault, is it?
Right.
So I think to some extent you have to decide when you're going to play along a little bit for the benefit of good client relations and when you have to have a hard line.
Are there questions you ask on the front end to figure out how difficult somebody's going to be to work with?
Oh, well, I mean, I wish I could tell you there was like a magic question that would, I always try and do some kind of telephone interview so you can get a sense. And you're not just seeing how the person is on the phone, but how hard is it to get that interview set up? Did they come to the interview on time? Did they change it 4 times before you finally got the interview? Those are sort of things you can come to. Did they come to the interview prepared? You know, that's part of it. You can try and get a sense of it that way. The other thing to ask up front is, who's my supervisor on this project? Who's my handler on this project? And really get that nailed down, because that often is a big wild card. You think you've signed up to work for one person, and you've really signed up to work with that person's marketing director, not the same person. And so you really want to make sure you understand who's my contact. Who do I need to make happy in this project? And I think that's a really good way to gauge profitability, because if it's more than one person, for example, if it's a committee,
well, I was just
that's a problem.
I was just going to say that to me, the way to really hone in on it, and the question to ask is, what's the review process, right? Once I submit something, who's going to review it? Whose edits do I have to incorporate? And who's ultimately got to sign off on that?
And how many people are contributing to it, I think.
That's right. So if you see ahead of time that there's 5 stakeholders who are going to have edits, it's going to have to get approved by multiple people, then you know right away that you have serious pain in the butt potential, and you have to build that into your fee. Versus if you're working one-on-one with a marketing director and it's their inputs, they're the master, and they have to sign off on it, then you know it's going to be a less demanding project, both time-wise and energy-wise.
Yeah, thank you.
Over here. We're going to take 2 more questions, then we're going to wrap up.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I'm an editor at a consulting firm, and I often am the pain in the butt client hiring ghostwriters. One question I'd advise you to ask is, what's been your experience working with writers before? Which will give you a good sense if they actually have some kind of process in place and know how reviews will run, or if they're doing this for the first time and want you to guide them on how the process should work.
Thank you. You're just signed up for our next panel. Great tip. All right, last question or point.
I think it was benefit everybody. She mentioned something. I was at your last workshop too, and she said the word corporation. I think you said the word corporation. In my experience, I get burned when I'm working for a business, because people change in the business. You're saying, they might not even know how many readers there are going to be on a particular project. Whatever they were marketing, parameters might have changed. There might have been a new boss further up the line. So this is, when you're working for a business, you have to be really careful. I would say that's the time where you need to go with Ellen's suggestion of the set fee plus the hourly rate later, because there are things that even the corporation, I'm talking about it like it's a person, the corporation doesn't really know what's going to happen 2 months from now, and you can be swept into some new contact person's morass later. So I just think, be particularly careful when you're working with a business.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me do a few house cleaning things before we wrap up. As we said before, Lori's book is for sale. She'll be over at the sign-in table afterwards if you're interested. I highly recommend it. Secondly, if you found this useful, we would welcome you to share the news about it and recommend watching it online on the ASJA website. The video should be up tomorrow. I don't have the exact link, but I believe if you go to asja.org, you'll be able to find it. What else? Like I said, we'll be sticking around afterwards for a few minutes to take more personal questions or follow-up questions if you're interested. And if you are a writer and you're not an ASJA member, you should strongly consider signing up. Any of us here can tell you how to do that if you're interested. So with that, thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to our panelists for your time. Really appreciate it. I also want to thank my associate at Gotham Ghostwriters, Kristen Williams, who organized this and did a fantastic job, and our intern, Liz Dana. It wouldn't have been possible without them.